Welcome everyone to another episode of the DVC Clubhouse Show. I'm Amy, joined as always by Jeff.
Hey, everybody.
And we are joined again this week by Jessica, who, if you tuned in a couple of weeks ago, you may have seen her DVC origin story. Jessica, thank you so much for coming back to have another conversation with us. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
During Jessica's DVC origin story, she discussed what it's like to, in small detail, what it's like to be a wheelchair user as a DVC member, as a Disney World fan. And so we thought that it would be great to bring Jessica back to talk a little bit more about that, to get a little bit more in depth so that she can share her experience as a wheelchair user and talk a little bit about her access needs. Before we dive into it, I just want to put an invitation out to anyone watching who has different access needs, who might want to come on and talk to us and share your experience as a DVC member so that you can provide your insight that might be helpful who are considering DVC membership or who are new to DVC membership. So just reach out to us either in the comments or send us a message. While we're at it, if you are new to the channel, please go ahead and subscribe, like, comment on the video, let us know what you like, what you want to see more of, and thank you for joining us. So Jessica, so good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
And
yes, definitely. Welcome.
So, and again, thank you again for taking time out of your schedule to come back to have another conversation with us. You, during our last conversation, you brought up some points that we definitely wanted to get more in depth with, but we wanted to focus on your DVC origin story. So can you just share with us, with the audience, what your access needs are as it relates to being a DVC member and going to Disney World?
Well, I guess I should start by calling out what my disability is. So I have a condition called osteogenesis imperfecta, which is a brittle bone disorder. And so the type that I have makes me not able to walk at all. So I can like pivot a little bit on my feet, but not really stand or walk. And I'm also short stature. So I'm 3'10" in height. And so that means that I use a wheelchair that's more of a pediatric size. So it's a little like lower to the ground. So that makes, things like transferring and getting in and out of vehicles difficult. And I think that plays into what my needs are in Disney World.
When you are making your plans, how do you decide which resort? I mean, I know from your DVC origin story, you love the boardwalk and there's a lot of nostalgia there for you, but you mentioned that there are resorts that just don't work for you. So can you talk before you even get there, when you're making your plans, what plays into the decision as to where you are going to stay?
So for me, that decision is based on location more than anything. So, I love proximity to the parks because it just makes getting around easier. So I like being at the boardwalk or the beach club or one of the Magic Kingdom resorts because it just makes, getting into the park that much easier. So that's the first thing. But the other thing that should be named is that when I go in to make my reservation, there's a way to, look at only accessibility or ADA rooms. And then within that category, so it's like a little checkbox when you're making your reservation on the website, that you can just look for rooms with access. And then within that category, there are a number of different types of rooms. So there are rooms that have a tub with rails, for example. And that is considered a wheelchair accessible room based on, whatever need you have. There is a category for a roll-in shower, which is usually the category that I book. There is a category for hearing impairment, and there's a category that's called Florida access. And I'm very nebulous on what that means. I've tried to look it up and understand it, but apparently Florida has their own rules for what accessibility means, and I'm completely unclear. So
Interesting.
there's that category too. And I may be missing one or two, but there are a lot of different categories. So you can really go in and look at, what your specific needs are. And the thing about booking those rooms, which is always interesting to me, is that you never really know. I mean, there are so few of them in each resort. And you never really know, like, if you happen to overlap with somebody who's also looking for that specific category, you're out of luck, right? Like, so I always try to book at, within my window, my 11-month window, or, I try to switch around at 7 months, but you never really know what you're going to get because somebody else might be looking for that exact same room at the same time. And if there are only 2 in the resort, then you're out of luck. But
How important it, so in the DVC community, we talk about how it's really important to own where you want to stay because of that
Yeah.
11-month booking privilege. And
Yeah.
for anybody who might be watching who is not a DVC member, when you own a home resort, you're able to book at that resort 11 months before your check-in date. Every other resort you can book in 7 months ahead of time. So you have a clear advantage at your home resort because you can be amongst the first to book there. So it sounds like it really is important if you are somebody who has disability related needs
Yes,
that you own at a resort that that is really going to meet those needs so that you're pretty much guaranteed to get a room at that resort. Would you say that's
I would
right?
say that's true a lot of the time. But what I was going to say is that the flip side of that is that there may be nobody looking to book those rooms at the time that you want to go. And then you've got like, an open, and I know that this conversation has come up in some of the groups that we're in where people have said, "Hey, is it wrong for me to book an accessible room when it's available?" And my answer is always yes, it's wrong. It's wrong. Because you're possibly taking away the only room from somebody who needs it.
And my follow-up question was, how often do you run into an inventory issue? We all complain all the time that, oh, we didn't get in, we have to split stay at 17 different resorts because we didn't book early enough. Like, how hard is it for you, first of all, to book a last minute trip?
I
And
don't book last minute trips.
you don't ever do it.
No.
Yeah. And that makes sense.
Yeah,
And second of all, like,
I have to plan ahead.
and do you ever run into an issue where you've got a week that you want to go that you can't because you don't have availability?
I have to say that I don't know that that's ever actually happened to me because I mean, I'm just because I'm scared of this exact issue, I always book as far in advance as I can. And then, if plans change, then I can be flexible with it and see what's available. But at least I have something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But it does happen that those rooms sell out and then you're just out of luck.
Interestingly enough, the only time I've ever stayed at the Grand Californian in California was I booked a room day of, like, somebody canceled or something happened. I was in line for Soarin' Over California, and I was like, I've never stayed there. I wonder if there's anything available. And there was a studio available. So I nabbed it. It didn't say anything about anything. It just said studio. And when I went to check in, sure enough, it was an ADA room, which I felt awful about, but that's what they assigned me. I didn't request it, So I,
Exactly. And what happens is that if those rooms don't get booked, they go into the regular inventory eventually.
interesting.
That's
Yeah,
what that's
I thought it was interesting that that's where they assigned me, but
yeah. And people do get assigned ADA rooms all the time. And, sometimes are not happy about it, which I get for a variety of reasons. Um, but that's what happens. They get assigned to the regular inventory once they're not booked by somebody who really needs them.
And that was going to be my question. So if, so me as somebody who wants to just book a standard deluxe studio at a resort, when I'm making my reservation at 11 or 7 months, those should not come up as available inventory. Is that correct?
They
Or
shouldn't come up as, no, they will not come up as you'd
okay,
have to click that little checkbox. And then you would see what that availability is. But at 11 or 7 months, no, those would not be in the regular inventory. So if you're booking those rooms, it should be because you need them.
all right. And so when we talked during during our last video with you, you talked about in choosing resorts, there are factors that come into play, and you alluded to it before, that transportation is, or location and proximity is
Yeah.
really the priority for you.
Yeah.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you own at Boardwalk and at Bay Lake Tower, right?
We own at Boardwalk, Beach Club, Bay Lake Tower, and Animal Kingdom Lodge.
Okay. And so three of those four resorts are in very close proximity
Mhm.
to parks.
Yeah.
Um, and I can't remember if it was at a conversation that you and I had offline, or if it was during the last conversation, but you had talked about something, just like even something as at what seems as mundane as like the thickness of like hallway carpeting.
Yes. That's something that has
And
actually changed for the worse over the years.
Really?
Well, yeah, when we first started going, yeah, I mean, everybody likes a plush carpet, right? Except somebody who uses a wheelchair. Um, because it's just hard to push, and the hallways can be long depending on where your room is, and it's an exhausting, trek if you're a manual wheelchair user. If you're in an ECV or in a power wheelchair, different story. But for me, that's a problem. And there are places, for instance, Wilderness Lodge, where there is a long ramp leading down to Roaring Forks, and getting down it is no problem, but getting back up. I would almost rather go around the building and to avoid that ramp, because it's got a thick plush carpet and it is a very long ramp.
Sorry, has that something that you ever addressed with Disney? Hey, thanks for the ramp, but can you put some laminate flooring down?
No, I honestly haven't reached out about that. I've always thought like I need to, but it would be like an airing of grievances. Like I would,
well, and you and I recently met up at Animal Kingdom Lodge. We had drinks at Victoria Falls Lounge, and you know, and as probably is typical for somebody who is not accustomed to traveling with a wheelchair user, I there are things that I didn't notice that I hadn't noticed before, but when I was meeting up for with you for drinks, I noticed that ramp to get up to that lounge.
also carpeted, but at least not very long. It's a pretty short
Mhm.
ramp, so it was manageable.
And so and because you have called these things to my attention, I noticed, like, oh man, like this is carpeted, and it is.
Mhm.
And for me it looked like it was long. I mean,
Yeah.
my perspective clearly different than yours as a wheelchair
Yeah.
user and somebody who has lived this. Um, but I noticed, and the way that resort, those restaurants are built is,
Mhm.
you can walk down the stairs from the lobby and get down to
Mhm.
those restaurants, but to get to the lounge or to get to those restaurants, it seems like you kind of have to take a roundabout way
At
if
very
you
at
if you
and Animal Kingdom Lodge in particular, I think is like it's laid out in such a funky way, which is cool in some regard, but like yeah, that I have to go to the elevator and to get to Victoria Falls, the main elevator, and then down a long hallway and then up that ramp, whereas anybody else could just use that lobby staircase.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I feel
I
as though
mean,
there are. Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say these are the things that people who use wheelchairs have to deal with all the time. Like, and out in the real world, even, not just it's not just a Disney thing.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Well, I'm sure. And I feel as though, at least the perception out there is that Disney of all places is actually maybe even a little bit better than just the average place that you would go to on a daily basis.
It is. And that's why I go there. Because I don't have to, like, in general, I don't have to worry about access in Disney. Like, I know everything is going to be accessible in some way. And yeah, I mean, that's the appeal for me, that I know it's going to be accessible. The other thing that I want to say is, one of the issues that I have with access at Disney is that there is a presumption of there being a helper, and that there's always going to be somebody there to support a person with a disability. And that it's not, it doesn't presume independence. So in the units, for example, like in the rooms, even in the ADA rooms, the towel bar is really high, like, or the towel, not the towel bar, the towel rack. It's like really high above the toilet. Like, you couldn't lower it. The microwave is high. The cups and the, dishware, they're all in the top cabinets. And so these are some of the things that I ask for when I get there, to have those things lowered, to have them brought down. Because I don't want to have to rely on my people. Even if, like, sometimes I travel by myself and then I really need that. And then sometimes I travel with my family and I don't want to have to constantly be asking for things, because that's not how I live.
Yeah, that
Well,
seems
and
like
so
something
that
to me.
then,
That seems like something to me that if Disney's going to provide that kind of accommodation, they should be thinking a little more ahead of the curve and dealing with some of those issues. That seems like a design standpoint.
It is a design problem. And I think part of that is the fact that they don't have anybody in a wheelchair who helps them with their design. And that's one of the things that I've always thought, like, oh, I should reach out to Disney and just be like, listen, like, let me walk you through this and show you what you could be doing better, because you could be doing it better. But I think that they are governed by the ADA, which has certain requirements and certain standards for height levels of different things. And that's just what they go by. But the ADA is not the be all and end all. It doesn't,
Sure.
For some people like me, it's not enough.
well, and I think that your point is excellent around the presumption that you are going to be traveling with a companion who will be able to deal with the things that are out of your reach.
Mhm.
And as as somebody who likes to travel by yourself, as someone who travels with your kids who they want to go off and do their own thing, to be able to have the comfort of knowing that you can function independently in a unit, what I imagine would be, that would be really nice
Yeah.
to know that. And so
And can I
go
add
ahead.
to that point?
Yeah, of
Because
course.
I have a funny story. And my funny story is that when I travel with my boys, for whatever reason, the cast members assume that they're my kids. And I don't know what it is about that. But when I travel with my daughter, they assume she's my caretaker. And this is part of, I think, a fault in cast member training, that in a lot of places, and I'm going to say that it's not in the resorts, it's usually in the parks and restaurants. There's an assumption that whoever you're with is the person that they should be talking to about me. And that happens all the time with my daughter. And we had a recent trip, it was like 2 springs ago, where everywhere we went, they talked to her and not me. And she like, she's, sort of, she was, I think she was like 14 at the time. And she's kind of learned, like, to sort of step away and say, I don't know, that's my mom, like, but I have met with that situation over and over again. And it has happened to me a couple of times at the boardwalk as well, in the bakery, because the way that the counter is built at the boardwalk, well, now it's the boardwalk deli. So um the way that the counter is built, it just blocks, it's just over my head. So it just blocks their view of me. And I get skipped over. When I go there by myself, I get skipped over all the time. Like they go to the next person behind me, whoever that is. If it's my kid or if it's a stranger, whoever, is in line behind me, that's who they go to because they don't see me. And I think that that's that it always angers me, and I have called it out to them. Um, but I think it's part of a training issue.
Yeah, that would definitely be annoying and frustrating. I don't know. And clearly in this world, there's a myriad of people that need extra help or that have disability needs or wheelchair needs or whatever. And obviously Disney doesn't have the capacity to handle every single one on a case by case basis. There's just no way to do that. But these kinds of things that you're talking about seem
Yeah.
like it ought to be something pretty simple that they
Yeah.
could could do better.
Yeah, those are things they could do better. And the same thing with going back to the carpeting. The carpets have gotten thicker over the years.
Yeah.
So like they're way more plush now than they used to be. I used to have no problems rolling on the carpets in the hallways, but now they're like real padded. And those are things that I feel like they're kind of unnecessary. I mean, even if you're pushing a stroller, it's harder to push,
For sure.
on a thicker carpet. But,
Yeah.
That's just my perspective.
So back to like when you're choosing your resorts, you choose based on proximity.
Yeah.
Your go-tos are your home resorts then, it sounds like. You'll Boardwalk, Beach Club, Bay Lake Tower,
Yeah. But
Animal
we've also
Kingdom.
stated like the Grand Floridian is great. There's no issue there. And I haven't been to Big Pine Key, but the original DVC building there is small and contained, and the hallways aren't long in any direction. So I actually have no problem getting around there.
With regard to Big Pine Key, I just stayed there, this last September, and I don't know why I was paying attention to it, but I was. I think it was because I want to bring my mom who could use a little extra help, and I was like, this would be a pretty cool place. The only downside is you have to wait 17 years for an elevator, but if you can do that, it didn't seem like it was hard to navigate. We had a great room on the ground floor and didn't even need the elevator. So yeah. I think Grand Floridian is a home run from my point of view, but
I love it there. Mm-hmm.
So I think it was in our last video when we were discussing with you that, going to someplace like Old Key West or Saratoga Springs those are kind of off the list because
they're more complicated. Yeah, I mean, they're not undoable, but they're more complicated just because getting to bus stops takes longer. And the other thing is that having those, depending on where your room ends up being, having those interior bus loops sometimes means that by the time the bus gets to your stop, there are already 2 to 3 wheelchairs or ECVs on it, and then you have to wait.
Do you run into that problem at Animal Kingdom Lodge as well? Because it's bus only.
Never have run into that problem there. No. Mm-mm.
And so other than those two, are there other resorts that you avoid, or are there other resorts on the flip side that you feel like 100%, yes, I'm comfortable here?
So I like the Polynesian as well. I'm not a huge fan of like those exterior buildings, but I think the Polynesian in general does a great job in terms of access. Only stayed there once. It honestly, I'm looking forward to the tower because the studios there don't really meet my family's needs, but that doesn't really have anything to do with access. The one that I avoid is Wilderness Lodge. And I have to say, like, I love it there. I think it's a beautiful resort and it's themed so well. And I want to try it again because it's been years, but access there is complicated. And it's because some of the transportation to Magic Kingdom is via ferry. And sometimes the ferries are not accessible because of tide levels. I talked about this a little bit in the last video, because of tide levels that affect Bay Lake in a way that they don't affect Seven Seas Lagoon, because Seven Seas Lagoon is man-made. So those tide levels impact the water, obviously the water level, and the ferry being accessible. But even despite that, when the water level is at a good height, those ferries are a lot smaller than, for instance, the friendship boats on Crescent Lake. Those are much bigger. And the ramps are super steep and not something that I can manage on my own. So every time I've been on those like Bay Lake ferries, I haven't really felt super safe, and I definitely need somebody with me to push. So that's a resort that I unfortunately avoid.
Understandable.
That makes sense. And when I was just recently there, I stayed there not too long ago. I saw somebody, an ECV user, they were not able to get onto the boat, and they needed to wait, and they were, asked to wait to the side. And so I
Yeah.
saw that it was an issue because, and I did it, I noticed it. And I do have to say, I think, having met you and become friends with you, I see things through a different filter than I did
Yeah. I
previously.
get that. I actually
And
get that a lot. Like, for all my friends say, like, before we met, I had no idea that this was even a problem or a thing. Yeah.
and so
Well, I
you've
appreciate you
mentioned things to
noticing.
me before, and I thought to myself, gosh, I would be terrified
Mhm.
to drive this ECV onto this boat right now. That would be terrifying for me.
Yeah.
So I can fully see why, Wilderness Lodge would not be a resort that would be
Yeah.
one that would accommodate those types of needs.
Yeah.
Um, and so now you've mentioned that at the resorts, especially at Boardwalk, you even kind of have a relationship with the engineering cast members there, because they will
I
come
do.
and they'll lower your bed for you.
They
Are
will.
those
So
so talk a little bit about that, and is that something that you arrange prior to your arrival, or can you wait until you get there
I
and have it?
usually wait until I get there, to be honest. I guess it's something I could ask for, but it requires like explanation, and sometimes that's better done in person. So I usually wait until I get there. But that's I always have like these, like, list of things that I need to get done when I first check in. Like, I need to call for my owner's locker, and I need to do this and that. And like, literally the first thing is I go to the front desk and I, talk to them about asking for engineering to help me with lowering the bed. And like, and it's not just a Boardwalk thing. In every resort, they're always so happy to help once they know what the needs are. So what I ask for is for the bed to be taken off the frame. Now, if you stay in an ADA room, that's easily done. But if you stay in a non-ADA room, they can't do it, because like, it's one of those slat beds that they're like built differently. They have the slats instead of a box spring. So if you stay in a non-ADA room, they won't be able to help you. But in an ADA room, they can. It's a box spring and a mattress, and I just ask for them to take it off the frame and just plop the whole thing down on the floor. And then they always are very able to do that. And then they call for housekeeping to come and remake the bed. And everybody's always so happy to do it and willing to do it. So what I've learned, though, is that different resorts have different bed frames. What I was just mentioning was at the Boardwalk, but for example, we stayed at Animal Kingdom Lodge in a club level room, and their bed, it did have the mattress and the box spring, but it had like legs that screwed on. There were like 12 of them under the frame, and they had to unscrew all of them, and it took so long, and I felt so bad. But again, they were very happy to do it for me. They had to go get power tools, and it took like a half an hour. Like, it was a whole thing. But And I felt bad, especially because I was only there 2 nights. It was like they were gonna have to rebuild the whole thing after we checked out. But again, very willing to do it.
And for the other issue you mentioned earlier about the microwave being high and the
Yeah.
dishes being high,
They usually
will
just
they?
bring it down on the counter. Yeah.
Okay.
And they always say, "What else can I do?" Before they leave the room, after they've done all of these, crazy things. "What else can I do for you?"
Which is great. I mean, that's awesome that they're, accommodating, but I go
Yeah.
back to what we said before. All the man hours that requires to do that, housekeeping and engineering and
Yeah.
everybody else that has to come in, while great that they're willing to do that, it seems like they could have had a little more forethought and foresight and solved these problems or
Yeah.
met these requirements before it was necessary to retrofit.
Yeah. So one of the things that I actually have said to them is like to management is that their bed heights in most resorts, the DVC resorts that I've been in, most of their bed heights are not ADA compliant in those ADA rooms. I've measured them like with a tape measure and I've looked up the regs. They're higher, which I think is what most people genuinely like. But if it's an ADA room, I think that they should just already be lower. The only resort that I've stayed in that had a bed that I could actually get into without asking, there were 2, Caribbean Beach and Port Orleans Riverside. Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I've made an observation too, and this would be something that would be more relevant for ECV users is, and I noticed this when I was staying at Animal Kingdom Lodge, that the ECVs, a lot of people park them outside of their room
They do.
because there's not enough space
Yeah.
in those
I've noticed
rooms
that. I've noticed that as
keep
well.
it.
Yeah.
And then you would think that also just in terms of like, and maybe that's not an ADA regulation, but in terms of being able to have that accessible in the room, that maybe there should be a space that would be able to fit.
Yeah, you would think, especially in an ADA, like if that's the room that if you're not booking an ADA room, then all bets are off, right? Like you
Right.
can't have that kind of expectation. But in an ADA room, yes, that it would be nice to have that amount of space. They are roomier in some ways, but the bathroom, because the bathroom has to be bigger, it takes up more of the room,
Right.
from the like living space.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Which makes sense, but
Yeah.
not super convenient
Yeah. Yeah.
when you're in your room and you don't have any place to put your mobility device.
Yeah. The other thing is like plugs. Like you would have to have, like, if you have an ECV, it needs to be charged. So you would have to have not only the space to park it, but a place to charge it. And the
Yeah, and
hallways are
that's
convenient for
yeah,
that because they do have, they have plugs and, the room.
right.
I get why people leave them out there. I do.
Yeah. So you've identified some things that are definitely areas of like for improvement. But as you've been a DVC member, you joined in 2000.
Mhm.
Have you seen have things improved? Like, has there been an evolution, or do you think that things have pretty much stayed the same?
No, in fact, what I was brainstorming with my kids about this yesterday, and what I realized is that I think things have gotten worse. So the other, aside from the thickness of the hallway carpets, which is a biggie for me. So I always, when I put in my request for a room, it's always like I always have to scope out which rooms are, the type that I reserved. So a roll-in shower ADA room. And then I put in a request for the one that I want. And it's usually either the one that's like right off of the elevators or like right around the corner from the lobby. Because I don't want to have to roll down, 12 hallways to get there. The other thing is that since I've been a DVC member, for safety, I'm sure they've put up fencing around pools. And the gates that they have installed have high levers. So the levers are like super, super high. And there are some resorts where I can reach them barely, and others where it's like not even possible. And I know that they do that for safety so that kids can't get in and out easily, like little kids. But for people with disabilities who can't stand, um, out of reach.
Well, and once again, I keep going back to my same line of thought here. Okay, if they want to be safe and secure and not have kids drown in the pool, great. Have one access point that is either manned by a cast member all the time to help, or make it so that it's ADA compliant, because that
Yeah.
seems again like an easy fix to me. That's a
Right.
cheap fix.
And for example, at the boardwalk, there are a variety of entrances, but most of them are not accessible. There's only one that is accessible. And that lever is so high.
Yeah, that seems like an oversight to me. I don't understand that at all. That's a simple fix.
It
I
seems
could go to
you would think.
I could go to Lowe's right now and get it done, and I am not at all handy.
Yeah. 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 So, I mean,
So
yeah, I think unfortunately, I think, with an increased concern for safety and other guest comfort, sort of like the disability perspective is not at the top of their thinking.
yeah, and I feel like we live in a very um lawsuit heavy kind
Yeah.
of society. So they are definitely covering their backs,
Mhm.
where if something went wrong, there could be a huge lawsuit. So they're prioritizing that over
Yes.
everybody's comfort. So
Yeah. And the
there's got to be a
reality,
middle ground though.
yeah, it would be nice, but the reality is that the vast, vast majority of guests are not me, right? They're, a typical able-bodied person. So that's that's their audience. And that's,
Well, but at the
Well,
same
and
time, it's like I said before, yeah, they can't meet everybody's needs. That would be impossible, but there should be a minimum standard that should be a little bit higher than what it is right now, I feel like. And I'm somebody on the outside looking in, but I'm sitting here listening to your story, and I'm like, I'm aggravated. I'm like, I want to write a letter. I'm ready to write emails, because you're not asking for anything that is unreasonable or cost prohibitive, or I don't know. It seems to me that they definitely could do better.
I agree.
and and so if you were to give advice to either a new DVC owner or somebody who is considering DVC membership, what words of wisdom would you have for them that they should consider, or maybe what do you feel like you want to tell people that they should know?
So I would say book early to make sure that you get the room you need. Um, and then the other thing I would say is do research once you have your room booked. Like touringplans.com has a great hotel room finder, where you can look up all of these rooms and see exactly where they are, and then put in a request for that room or one of those rooms. Because my experience has been that they really do their best to accommodate that when they're able to. And I've even gotten calls from like hotel management, saying, "Oh my goodness, I know you put in this request and we can't meet it, and I'm really, really sorry. Is this going to work better for you? Or can this work for you? Like an alternative?" Like they literally call me on the phone and will ask me that. And I'm grateful for that kind of thing, because I know that they're thinking and they're trying to help. But if you can be proactive about that, do it. Put in that request.
It's good advice.
Yeah.
And so overall, I mean, I know that you love going to Disney World, you love being a Disney Vacation Club member. Um, how do you feel? And you said that's why you go to Disney World,
Yeah.
because of all the places you go, you have a sense of comfort, maybe slash familiarity
And
that,
safety, because I do feel safe there. Like, I know that I don't have to like do some crazy thing to get into a location that I want to get into. I can just roll right in.
So I have a question. Do you ever go to Universal? Are you Disney specific?
I mean, I went when I was a kid and we haven't been back, and it's mostly like a cost thing, but I feel
Sure.
like they would probably do a good job too.
Yeah, I would be curious to get that point
Yeah.
of view. So
Yeah. I mean, but that for me, oh, this is another point that I wanted to bring up. And I'm sorry, Amy, because I feel like I cut you off.
okay.
So one of the things, and this is not DVC specific, is the design planning for attractions. Because I think that, obviously there are some that I'm not going to be able to access. Like I'm not getting on a roller coaster. I'm not, I just can't transfer into a lot of the ride vehicles. And that's fine. But something like Navi River, I mean, I know not, it's not everybody's favorite attraction, but it was built from the ground up. And it should have been built with like ADA compliance in mind, and it was not.
yeah.
And Joe Rody at one point actually responded to this, and it was based on the height. It had to do with the height of flights of passage and how it went underneath, and it had to be sunken into the ground lower than they would have preferred. But it's not an accessible attraction, and I'm like, okay, like really? I feel like that would have been an easy one to make, accessible, like, Small World and uh what am I thinking of? Living with the Land, and even the ride in Mexico, in the Mexico Pavilion. They're all accessible. Why couldn't Navi be when you built it from scratch?
Yeah, that seems strange. It's one thing to retrofit something that's been around since the 70s, or
Exactly.
80s or whatever, but building a new ride, again, oversight.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
and more than an oversight, like it feels like negligence,
yeah.
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, we're talking about, especially like we're talking about this like film franchise now that is like all about like the tech, I mean, that seems like this is not something that you could have figured out. I mean, I don't know. I'm not an
Mhm.
engineer. I don't know,
Yeah.
but it just feels like that is a sort of a negligent
Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
that happened
So
there
that's what I
for
mean
a
when I
brand new
say,
land.
right. And that's what I mean then when I say that people with disabilities are not at the forefront of Disney's thinking.
Yeah.
They're not, just not.
Well, and maybe they don't need to be the forefront, but they certainly don't need to be last in line.
Yeah. Well,
Again, middle of the road is not too much to ask. I
right.
don't.
And I actually, this goes back to kind of the talking about the resorts, but I'm just curious, you've mentioned that the boats at Wilderness Lodge are not great. The boats that are on Seven Seas Lagoon, those are okay.
Um, honestly, no, because they're tiny. I mean, the large ferry is fine. The one that goes to the TTC, that one's fine. The ones that go to like Grand Floridian, I don't believe that they're accessible. Those are
And then
tiny ones.
how is it for you navigating the Skyliner and the monorail?
The Skyliner is great. Okay. So the Skyliner is fantastic, except that, and this goes back to cast member training. They have to stop it completely at each stop, and they don't always want to because it takes longer to kickstart it. So they usually just want to slow it down for you, and that's scary to like roll off of the Skyliner as it's still moving. Like that,
Not a chance. There's no way
no,
I would do that.
it's not great. So they slow it. They usually, especially at like the Riviera, for whatever reason, that one, they try to just slow it, but it's still moving as you're getting off and on, and I'm not a fan. But by and large, if they stop it all the way, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. The monorail is also great. The only thing about the monorail, they have a ramp that they put out, and they're very good about doing that. But sometimes, again, cast members at the various resort stops don't take a look at. So there's usually a button that gets pushed on the side of the doorway where it says, okay, there's somebody in here in a wheelchair or an ECV, and this is their stop. So sometimes they don't notice that. And I've never gotten left on because I'm usually like, hey, I need to get off. But sometimes my kids have had to go out and say, hey, put out the ramp. And they're like, oh, sorry. But it's just like, an oversight.
And so now correct me if I'm wrong, but at Epcot, at their monorail station, there's an elevator, right? That goes
There
up to the
is.
platform.
Okay.
Is there,
Yes,
but there is not one at Magic Kingdom. And
there isn't one anywhere else. That's the at Magic Kingdom, I can get off on the monorail at Magic Kingdom, but by myself I could never go up that ramp because it's like, I mean, so long. Like I might do it if I could like pause midway and like gather my strength.
I don't like to walk up that ramp.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy, but
up.
there's no elevator there. Epcot has the elevator. Yeah.
And so then does that then become an issue then when you're thinking about if you were staying at the Grand Floridian or the Polynesian, who both have boats that are not accessible? If you were to stay there, getting back to those resorts, is that a challenge?
So, okay, I would never do it by myself. Like I would always have to have somebody with me to help me. But yes, it's definitely a factor. So like if I ever take a solo trip, I'm never staying at a monorail resort because of that, and then just having to deal with like so many buses to get to other places. That's why when I take solo trips, I'm always staying at like an Epcot resort.
That makes
and then if I
sense.
and then and so if I go to Magic Kingdom, if I'm staying at the Poly or Grand Floridian, I'll always have somebody with me to help me up that. Or, honestly, the walkway to the Grand Floridian is lovely.
Yeah.
That would be more doable.
I've yet to take that path.
Yeah, it's long, but it's very pretty.
So is there anything else that you want to share or things that
I had a whole list, but I think I covered everything. Yeah, I think I covered everything that I wanted to talk about. I mean, there's probably more issues that that are out there that I'm not thinking of right now. And then when I go next time, I'll be like, oh man, I should have talked about that.
Well, and I have no problem doing this again in the future, because it's such a unique but important perspective that I think will benefit a lot of people. Not only people that need it, but people that might not understand it, that, when they get frustrated waiting for the bus because they have to load a wheelchair, that, maybe it's okay to wait an extra 3 or 4 minutes.
Oh yeah, people do get angry about that.
They do. I've seen it. And,
because we get loaded on first and they've been waiting longer than I have maybe. And they're like standing at the door like, hey, let me in.
Yep. Yeah. So I have no problem doing this in the future if there's more to share. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
I definitely appreciate you taking the time. It's been eye-opening for me, I can say, to say the least, and good. I think it'll help a lot of people.
I hope so. I did have an interesting experience last summer. We stayed at the boardwalk and there was a man there who used a wheelchair very similar to mine. And it was his first ever Disney trip. And he just wanted to chat with me. Like, do you come here often? Like, do you, like, what is your take on all of this? And I think he felt like Disney could do better. I think that was his takeaway.
Yeah.
Yeah, regarding not regarding every like all of it, resorts, but also parks and attractions and things like that. Yeah.
Well,
Well,
maybe
and I
Disney
think
will
that's
see
why
that
these
as well.
conversations are important, because it's not just for you to impart your wisdom on other potential DVC members, or new DVC members, but it's putting the conversation out there to bring visibility to it. Because as we've discussed, there are just things that should be happening, and unless there is visibility around it,
Yeah.
change won't happen. So
Yes.
I think it requires
Agreed.
having these conversations in public forums
Yep.
to increase the visibility around the issues, so that maybe change will happen.
Yep. Completely agree.
So, I just want to thank you again.
You're welcome.
Thank you for
Thanks for
coming on
having me
here
because
again.
this is a conversation that's obviously very like important to me, near and dear, and I'm glad to have the forum to have that conversation.
And
Absolutely.
to everyone who has joined in and watched this conversation, please, we encourage you to, if you have any experiences that you want to share, again, you can reach out to us. At the very least, please share them in the comments section here. If you have any questions for Jessica, drop them in the comments. We'd love to be able to continue this conversation in a meaningful
Absolutely.
way. So,
And
um,
I try to be as active as I can on the various groups that I'm in, especially when conversations about access come up. I try to, so please reach out.
Yeah, and on top of to add to that, anything that you think is a unique point of view that the regular public might not understand, we would love to hear from you as well. Like, I don't think there's enough of these conversations happening, and so if you have food allergies, if you have anything under the sun that you think might be shareable, we would love to hear from you.
and with that, thank you everybody for joining in. And until next time, DVC you real soon. Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.